So now it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce a dear friend of the TwinWest Chamber today as our keynote speaker. We are very excited to have former Congressman Jim Ramstad with us today. Jim Ramstad served as member of Congress for Minnesota from 1991 until 2009. He was a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, Health and Trade Subcommittees, and chairman of the Oversight Committee. Congressman Ramstad also served on the House Small Business Committee and co-chaired the Addiction Treatment and Recovery Caucus, Medical Technology Caucus, Law Enforcement Caucus, and Disabilities Caucus. Congressman Ramstad was chief co-sponsor of the landmark Mental Health and Addiction Treatment Parity Act, which became law. He was named Legislator of the Year by the National Association for Alcoholism and Drug Addiction Counselors in 1998, by the National Mental Health Association in 1999, and by the National Association of Police Organizations in 1997 and 2000. He was born in Jamestown, North Dakota, the third-generation member of a small business family. He received his BS degree from the University of Minnesota in 1968, Phi Beta Kappa, and his JD with honors from George Washington University in 1973. He served his country as a first lieutenant, U.S. Army Reserve from 1968 to 1975. He's a former criminal justice attorney and adjunct professor of government and constitutional law. Prior to his election to Congress, he served 3 terms in the Minnesota Senate, where he was Assistant Minority Leader from 1981 to 1990. In 2009, Congressman Ramstad was a resident fellow at the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. He currently serves as his Senior Policy Advisor to the Hazelton Foundation and the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, as well as Alliant Group, LLC. He is also a board member of the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University and TCF Financial Corporation. You sound busier now. He is also co-founder of the Lake Country Food Bank and a member of the American Legion Post 118, Plymouth Lions Club, and the Wayzata Chamber of Commerce. He and his wife, Catherine, have 1 daughter, Kristen, a graduate of Colorado College, and are members of the Wayzata Community Church. So please join me in a very warm welcome to Congressman Ramstad.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're very kind. This is a homecoming. This is a wonderful homecoming. It's just great to be back, to see so many friends, so many dear friends, some that go back 35 years, right, Tom Tart? Tom, this reminds me, as I told you when I walked in, this reminds me so much of, it takes me back really to the days in the early 80s when you and I were on both the boards of the West Hennepin Chamber of Commerce and the Northwest Metro Chamber of Commerce. And one day Tom and I were having coffee and we said, you know, what if we merged these 2 chambers and formed a new chamber? We could be a more potent force, more influence in the legislature and across the region, and across the state for that matter. Well, let me just say this. I want to congratulate each and every one of you who comprise the TwinWest Chamber of Commerce, who have taken this chamber beyond our wildest expectations when we held those weekly meetings at the Tally Ho restaurant in Crystal to form this organization. And you and your predecessor members and leaders of this great Chamber of Commerce deserve our heartfelt congratulations, because you have and continue to make a difference. Thank you, TwinWest Chamber. And Judy Johnson, I told Judy whenever she's hard up for a speaker, call me, and so obviously she called me. Judy, in all seriousness, you represent the best in public service, and you always have since our days working together when you were, even before you were mayor, when you were on the council in Plymouth. And thank you again, Danette, for that very, very kind introduction. I think George Will, who is the most intellectually honest pundit I know, and one of the most respected commentators of the political arena, put it best when he said, quote, "We're living in the most dangerous and difficult time since World War II." The most dangerous and difficult time since World War II. I think few would dispute that premise. Another commentator said, as a nation, we have a long, hard road to hoe. Now, some of you, Tom, you, Mick Lee, I think Jen was there, Jim Willis was there, my first election. When on election night I got a little bouquet of flowers with a card saying, "May you rest in peace." Yeah, that's the same reaction I had. May you rest in peace. Well, what is this about? So I called the florist the next morning, the Wednesday after the election, and I explained my puzzlement. And the florist came back a few minutes later after checking her records and said, "Ramstad, if you think you're puzzled, how do you think the guy at the cemetery feels who got the card saying, 'Congratulations on your new position. You have a long, hard row to hoe.'" Well, we have a long, hard row to hoe, all of us, as citizens, as members of the legislature and other elected officials at the state and county and local levels, and of course in Washington, the Congress and the President. We're still involved in 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, although Iraq is winding down. We all saw this past week how unstable the Middle East is, what happened with the horrific murders of our diplomats in Libya is just beyond comprehension, and I know our thoughts and prayers go out to their families. What's going on in Syria is concerning, and I think not hyperbole to say alarming. Iran threatens to develop a nuclear capacity. We all know what's going on in Egypt. Our homeland security is under constant threat. We've got 25 million people unemployed, 8.1% unemployment rate. That's 43 straight months above 8%. The median income last year to this year, the median income is down 10% of all Americans. And sadly, in Minnesota, 200,000 kids are living in poverty. 200,000 kids in Minnesota living in poverty. That's defined as family of 4 with $22,000 or less of income. And a lot of those kids are hurting. 40 million people in America have no health insurance. 80 million people are suffering the ravages of chemical addiction, drug addiction, and alcoholism. And tragically, and listen to this, tragically, in the last 2 years, more United States troops have committed suicide than died in combat in both wars. 6,500 troops committed suicide in the last 2 years after coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Not all of them after coming back, some of them while there. But they're coming back now to a waiting list at the VA across the country of 45,000 for treatment for their PTSD and drug addiction, and the waiting list 45,000 long. And they don't have health insurance, so they're not getting treatment. So they're going home and killing themselves. And that should be of alarm to all of us. And all of these problems are in the face of a federal deficit shortfall, red ink, this year of $1.6 trillion and a national debt now that does exceed $16 trillion. Let me put that another way. We now have a national debt as large as our entire economy. Think of that. Think of the implications for preempting investment capital, you small business people who want to grow and prosper and create jobs. And what's the response from Washington? A Republican, a member of Congress from Arizona, says, quote, Obama is an enemy of humanity. A Democrat from Florida says, Republicans want seniors to die quickly. That's their Medicare solution. The co-chair of the Tea Party caucus said, quote, 78 to 81 Democrats in Congress are members of the Communist Party. Huh? When he was pressed on that the next day at a stakeout by the press, he said, well, go figure, 78 to 81 members in the Black Caucus plus the Progressive Caucus. I mean, it's unbelievable rhetoric. It's unbelievable. And of course, even a member from Minnesota made the absurd assertion that President Obama, and this is a direct quote, President Obama is anti-American. I mean, how dare she? How dare she? How dare us lower the level of political discourse. It's no wonder the ratings for Congress, the job approval ratings, are at 8%. That's lower, by the way, than bail bondsmen. It's lower than debt collectors. That's, if any of you had an 8% approval rating, or any of your employees had an 8% approval rating, they'd be out the door. Tom Friedman, another respected journalist from right here in St. Louis Park, said this: the poisonous political environment in the United States is just like Israel in 1995 before Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated. Just like Israel and that, before that tragic death of Prime Minister Rabin. Let me just say that what's been said, and I thank God for, and the people of Minnesota for voting you into office. Those of you have expressed this many times. Extremists on both sides of the aisle need to cool it. They need to cool it. The hostile, threatening rhetoric is way over the top. And there's almost no bipartisan collaboration to find common ground, which is why we're sent to Washington, why we're sent to St. Paul, why we're sent to Plymouth City Hall to do business, do the people's business. There's only harsh rhetoric and polarization to score political points. And whoever said it is right. It's all about winning elections. It's not about making policy. It's not about, quote, doing good. Doing well. Miss Munson, my fourth grade English teacher, would not approve. But what needs to happen, the American people need to put pressure on politicians of both parties to restore, to bring back civility and decency in dealing with those who disagree. I mean, just think, a congressman having the gall to shout during the President's State of the Union message, President Obama's State of the Union message, "You lie." I mean, think of that. It's no wonder people don't respect Congress. Congress needs to take a page from the old Gipper's playbook. And those, most of you, well, you're pretty young, but those of us who remember the old Gipper, we know him as President Ronald Reagan. His closest friend in Washington was Democrat Speaker Tip O'Neill. And Tommy O'Neill told me this story that at the funeral mass for Senator Kennedy in South Boston. And of course, like anything Kennedy, it started 45 minutes late. So we were all standing up, and Tommy O'Neill, the former lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, and Tip and Millie O'Neill's son, he and his wife were in front of us. And so we started a conversation, and he told the story of how his dad, former Speaker O'Neill, and President Reagan kept Social Security solvent for another 40 years by working together to find common ground. First of all, when I say they're best friends, I'm not exaggerating. Virtually every Wednesday when they were in town, President Reagan and Speaker O'Neill were in town, they'd have dinner with their wives, just the four of them, down at the White House. And they became really close friends. And this is, again, according to Tommy O'Neill, and I had heard this from others. But one night at dinner, they were having dinner outside at the White House there, and after dinner, President Reagan said to Speaker O'Neill, "Tip, you and I need to take a walk. We need to talk about something really important. You ladies finish your dessert and have a cup of coffee, and we'll be back in not too long a time." So they took a walk around to the South Lawn, and you know that white chair, those of you who have toured the White House, that white bench, President Reagan said, sit down, Tip. We got to talk about Social Security. We got to solve this right here and now. And anyway, long story, well, it wasn't a very long story. They sat down, and President Reagan agreed to raise the payroll tax slightly, and Speaker O'Neill agreed to budge on his position with respect to the retirement age by raising that slightly, by raising it by 2 years. And they shook on that deal, and it was a fait accompli. I mean, if a Republican president and a Democratic speaker agree on something, it's a done deal, believe me. I was there 18 years to see that happen only too few times. But in those days, that's how things got done. They didn't compromise on principle, but they were pragmatic, and they worked together to find common ground in a bipartisan way, and they didn't care who took credit for it. The Democrats took credit, and the Republicans waved the flag of victory, and but it got done. And what's important is that Social Security was kept solvent another 43 years because of that post-dinner conversation at the White House between two great public servants. And unfortunately for our great country, those days of working together across party lines are by and large gone, at least in Washington. Gone are the days of Reagan and Tip O'Neill, the days of Dave Durenberger and Pat Moynihan working together on health care, Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch on judicial nominations, John McCain and Russ Feingold on campaign finance reform. And yes, I'm proud to say Patrick Kennedy and Jim Ramstad. Patrick and I toiled tirelessly for 12 years to provide greater access to treatment for people with addiction and mental illness. And we don't deserve all the credit. In fact, we deserve only some credit. But I give the credit to Paul Wellstone, who wrote the first bill. I give credit to Senator Kennedy, who worked his heart out on this cause, to conservative Republican Budget Committee Chairman, former Budget Committee Chairman Pete Domenici of New Mexico, who was the other Senate co-sponsor along with Senator Kennedy, who worked so hard on this. He has a daughter who suffered long and hard with mental illness. And the four of us, plus the late Senator Wellstone, worked for 12 years to get this done. And my proudest moment in Congress was standing next to President Bush, along with Senator Kennedy, Patrick Kennedy, and Senator Domenici in the Oval Office when that bill was signed into law. Because I believe in the real world, as in the real world, I should say, members of Congress can be friends and still hold strongly held policy differences. We can differ, we can agree to disagree, in other words. We can differ on issues but still be friends. And I didn't have a better friend in Washington, and most of you know this who know me, than Paul Wellstone. I loved him like a brother. We were elected the same year, 1990, and we didn't agree on 8 out of 10 issues. But I'll tell you, when you're talking about the Violence Against Women Act, you're talking about drug addiction, mental illness, education, the environment, there's nobody better in the trenches than Paul Wellstone. We used to have dinner almost every Friday night, and we'd switch off, and I'd try to get him to come to a restaurant in our area. But he said, look, Rammer, if we go to a restaurant, we're going to ruin both our reputations. And Paul was really a good human being, and we love Sheila, Catherine and I as well, and we miss him. But that was a proud moment, and that was another, well, my best example of bipartisanship, working in a bipartisan, pragmatic way to do what's right and to help people in the process. My message for the Congress and the President, therefore, is this. You have to work together in that bipartisan, pragmatic, and common sense way to address these serious problems facing our state and country. Please cool the toxic partisanship. Govern from the center. Find common ground. Work together to solve the serious problems, and they are serious problems facing our state and nation. Now, we need first and foremost more jobs for our people and more growth for our economy. I think few would dispute that. So create the climate where small businesses, where all businesses can grow and prosper and create the jobs to get our economy back on track. For the economy to grow and jobs created to put Americans back to work, I believe we desperately need a grand bargain to bring down our staggering national debt and deficit. If we don't reach agreement on tax cuts and spending, if Congress and the President can't reach an agreement, we're facing a fiscal cliff, which all of you know about if you read the papers or watch any news whatsoever. We're facing a fiscal cliff. That's why we need a grand bargain. Otherwise, we're looking at a $200 billion tax increase on December 31st, $110 billion in mandatory spending cuts, including half of those from the military and Homeland Security. Most economists, again, those without a political axe to grind, those who aren't Republican or Democrat hacks or employees, whatever, consultants, Takes one to know one. If we don't deal with this, most economists are saying now that there will be a double-dip recession as the economy goes over the fiscal cliff, the dreaded fiscal cliff. Moody's has already said it's going to lower our credit rating, our bond rating, 1%, 1 full point. This will really put the brakes on the economy. You thought 2008 was bad when credit was frozen. You ain't seen nothing yet if we don't reach a deal, if we don't reach a grand bargain and avoid this fiscal cliff. Listen to this, if Congress does not adjust the AMT, the alternative minimum tax for inflation, more than 30 million taxpayers will pay the AMT. That's up from the current 4 million who are paying it. It's going to go from 4 million people being caught by the AMT to 30 million. So let me just suggest this, and I've written a letter to the President, and it's co-signed by my friend Patrick. Right after the election, I believe the President, whoever he is, should summon the Democrat and Republican leadership in Congress, along with all 12 members of the House Senate Deficit Supercommittee, to join the President at Camp David and announce they're not coming back without a grand bargain. Pack your suitcases, ladies and gentlemen, because you're not coming back without a grand bargain. Now, I think the grand bargain must include 3 basic elements. First, some short-term job stimulus, real stimulus, shovel-ready projects. 2, debt restructuring in the housing market. And 3, a long-term debt reduction plan with entitlement cuts and, yes, tax reforms that increase revenues. You can't get there if you do the math, and if you're intellectually honest, you can't get there without revenues, without some taxes. Now, I'm not talking about new taxes. I'm talking about getting rid of the loopholes, restructuring, reforming the tax code so as to create revenues, so as to make the package revenue neutral. That is the same amount of dollars that's coming in now from taxes, same amount of revenues. Everything, I think, needs to be on the table to address our serious budget crisis. And I know that's heresy in some Republican circles, certainly among the Tea Party. I wouldn't get one vote for endorsement from that group. But we've got to be honest. We can't kid the American people anymore. They're smarter. They're seeing through it. And so we've got to have a grand bargain. We've got to have it before December 31st. Am I optimistic we're going to attain that objective? No. It won't be easy, and the economy won't be fixed overnight. But the only way to prevent an economic meltdown, to quote one economist, the only way to prevent an economic meltdown is the grand bargain. The President and Congress need to find common ground on taxes and spending, or we're going to fall off the fiscal cliff. They must compromise. That's not a dirty word. That's what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did that night to save Social Security. They must compromise and do what's right for the economy and the country to prevent falling off the fiscal cliff. They must work together, Congress and the President, in the same way we did in response to the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Those days seem so ancient now, so removed, when members of Congress stood on the steps of the Capitol, Democrats and Republicans, holding hands, singing God Bless America. And there was unity to do whatever it took to protect this great land of ours and the wonderful people who comprise this country, the American people. Congress and the President must work together in the same bipartisan way we did when the 35W bridge collapsed here in Minnesota. The first 2 people, ironically, Jim Oberstar was managing the transportation appropriation bill at the time. Jim asked for a recess and summoned the Speaker, and Jim and Nancy Pelosi came over to my desk, and we got a couple other members from Minnesota, and Speaker Pelosi said, anything you need in Minnesota, you've got. We'll help you. We'll help you. Again, the bipartisan cooperation, and Jim Oberstar, I want to add a postscript, was great to work with all 18 years in Congress. Thank Jim Oberstar for helping get the additional lane on 494. Thank him for helping fix the interchange at 169 and 494 and for the other improvements, because I always went to Jim Oberstar when he was chair. And in fact, I got along better with Jim Oberstar as chairman of the Transportation Committee than when Don Young, the irascible Republican from Alaska, the Republican, when he chaired it, when we controlled the body. Also, another great example of bipartisanship was in 2008 when we, and it was very controversial, but when Ben Bernanke came down to our caucus and said, if you don't pass a $700 billion bailout bill, this economy is going into not recession, not another recession, a depression like 1929. And I'll tell you, usually at those caucuses, it's like a sophomore, football meeting. Everybody's laughing and cutting up, and nobody's paying attention to the speaker or majority leader or the leadership up front. You could hear a pin drop. There was a hushed silence and a look of shock on the faces of all the members of that caucus when he said depression if we don't do the $700 billion bailout. Remember when the banks quit lending and so many small business people contacted me and just were desperate, could not get credit. Well, Congress rose to the occasion in a bipartisan, pragmatic way and addressed that serious dilemma. And now Congress and the President must work together again to get the economy growing so jobs can be created for our people. One CEO said last week on MSNBC, quote, if you can't plan, this is a business CEO, if you can't plan, you can't spend, and if you don't spend, you don't hire. It's as simple as that, and all of you businessmen and women know that to be true. So let me just sum it up by saying this. It really is, as every politician running for re-election is saying, it really is about jobs, jobs, jobs. And most Americans are saying, and certainly small business owners are saying, it's about jobs, jobs, jobs. But let me say it's more than just about jobs. It's about improving education. It's about making health care more affordable and more accessible. It's about preserving and protecting Social Security and Medicare. It's about strengthening national security and keeping our promises to our brave veterans. Keeping our promises to our brave veterans. And it's also about keeping a safety net for our most vulnerable citizens. As President Kennedy said in his first inaugural address, here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. And I thank God that you of the TwinWest Chamber, through your foundation, are doing God's work here on earth and in other ways, but you are reaching out to address some of the many needs of the people in our community. Bottom line, it's about the kind of country we're going to leave our children and grandchildren. And I know we can do better. Thank you. God bless. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very kindly. Danette's asked me to take questions, and
we're getting greedy with your time now.
No, listen. I'm just happy to answer any questions. I used to be able to defer to staff on the ones I didn't know, and now I don't have any. Now I don't have any. People say, is it a lot easier now? Life's a lot easier. You look okay, and everything's okay. And I say, well. It's an adjustment going from 21 staff members in 3 offices to 1 secretary and me. So it's an adjustment being back in the real world, but it's going well. Thank you. Danette, go ahead.
I'm glad you were able to bring up a couple of examples of bipartisan efforts. It was getting pretty depressing hearing you talk. An example of bipartisan effort comes from Eric Paulson, who was able to draw our congressional delegation in Minnesota together for the on the congressional side to repeal the tax consequences on medical devices. Can you speak to that a little bit and tell us, then play the devil's advocate as to why that is not a good idea?
Why it's not a good idea to repeal the tax on...
Speak to why it's a great idea, and then why it's
Well, first of all, the medical technology industry represents a lot of jobs in Minnesota. We're one of the leading states. I always was referred to by Bill Thomas as the member not from Minnesota during Ways and Means Committee meetings, but the member from Minnesota's Medical Alley, because medical technology is so important to our economy, to our healthcare system, and to people who are hurting. And so why it's not a good idea is because it takes away from research and development. And research and development is a huge expense for industry, all industries, especially medical devices, medical technology. And so I can't think of a reason why it's not a sound idea from a standpoint of a Minnesotan who cares about jobs and health care. And I applaud Eric's work on that. I started the House Medical Technology Caucus in 1992 with a Democrat from North Carolina who's since passed away, named Tim Valentine. And I always would go toe-to-toe with my friends from Silicon Valley and the Boston area, because we're always competing for companies to move to our locales, and those seem to be the three most respected, best medical technology corridors in the country. And I don't want to do anything to hurt. And that tax is really punitive on medical device companies, medical technology generally.
I just want to give testimony to Jim's relationship building, because I remember back at one of the campaigns, I don't remember what year it was, but you had been door knocking with me one afternoon in Plymouth, and we ended up at a fire station over in Plymouth, and Senator Paul Wellstone came, and he just made a beeline over to you, and I watched the interaction between the two of you and his high respect and seeking your counsel, and it impressed me a great deal, because you can get things done, and you know that you can be poles apart on many kinds of issues, but you don't get anywhere if you can't talk to people, even those with whom you may disagree. So that has been impressed me greatly, Jim. I admire it, and I appreciate your comments on the subject.
Well, thank you, Jen. And you know of my affection, my love for you as a human being, as a friend for so many years, and my respect for you as a public servant. You truly represent the best in service to people, and you've been so committed and so productive. And it was great to call you Madam Chair. I remember Wellstone always used, we'd appear jointly at seniors functions, education chamber meetings. Wellstone always would pull rank on me. He had seniority because he was a senator, even though we were elected the same year. He'd always pull rank and make me go first. And so this was a routine. I mean, this happened several hundred times, I'm sure, over the years. And so I'd get up and give my spiel and sit down, and Paul would get up and he'd look at me before he started speaking to the audience, and he'd say, "Rammer, I love you like a brother, but how can you be so wrong?" I'll tell you, Sheila, she made the best lasagna. We used to have a lasagna when we went there Friday nights, and I never was successful in getting Paul and Sheila, one time to a restaurant, but we went where Paul didn't think anybody would see us. But I love the guy. I read early on, after we were elected, that Ramstad seems like a real mensch. And Terry, I didn't know what mensch meant. I had to call Bob Stein. I had to call Steiner, my good friend from college. I said, "Bob, what in the heck is a mensch?" He said, "Well, that means somebody you have love for and you respect, and a mentor and friend. And from that day forward, Paul and I were friends."
Congressman Ramstad, speaking of big moments, when Speaker Boehner and the President were meeting on the big deal, can you explain a little bit of how it didn't become a big deal? And
Sure, I can tell you exactly what happened. Boehner went back to his conference, you know, the House Republicans don't have a caucus, they call it a conference. And the other three, the Senate and House Democrats and the Senate Republicans have caucuses, so it's confusing to people sometimes. But the House Republican Conference, the membership, the Republican members of the House, John went back to them, John Boehner, Speaker Boehner, and presented what he and the President had tentatively, again, it's up for dispute how far they had agreed, but they had agreed in principle to this grand bargain to solve the problem. And the Tea Party types who dominate the House Republican Conference started booing and wouldn't have anything to do with it. And if Boehner hadn't pulled the plug, I think Eric Cantor would be Speaker today, because he has the sympathy of the Tea Party types, again, who dominate the House Republican Conference. That's exactly what happened. They vetoed it, in other words. Hi, Ed Oliver.
Hi, Jim.
How are you?
Good. How can elected officials get away from feeling so beholden to financial supporters?
That's a $64 question. I don't have an answer for that one. I don't know, but they are. They are, and I'll tell you, we've been fighting the health insurance companies for 12 years, trying to get a reasonable. Not all of them. 8 national companies supported the parity bill because they saw the empirical data, and all the empirical data show that that's cost-effective to treat people equally. I mean, the average untreated alcoholic has health care costs 100% higher than mine. I've been a grateful recovering alcoholic, as you know, for 31 years. And so my health care costs are 100% less than my friends out there, our friends out there, still struggling with drug and alcohol addiction. I mean, the cost savings for every dollar we spend, we save $15. Criminal justice costs, social services costs, costs of Ritalin for kids from alcoholic families. So, and they're fighting us. And again, 8 of them have come aboard. In fact, from the very beginning, Kaiser Permanente came down to Washington at our invitation to testify for parity. But I'll tell you, they fight hard, and they're burning the midnight oil here locally at one of the health insurance plans to undo this, just like they're trying to undo the Affordable Care Act.
Albert, we have one more question back here. I just want to note that all of the local health plans supported mental parity. So just want to make that clear. Minnesota, all the local health plans supported mental parity and testified in
I know, and I
it.
appreciate that. I failed to mention that. Thank you for... See, you got the greatest staff in the world.
Congressman Ramstad, it's Ethan Roberts, JCRC. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
You had some great staff, and one of those staffers is Noah Jacobson, and it's a pleasure to work with him, with Congressman Paulson now, probably one of your best exports to the congressman. And I have a conference call with him in a couple hours today about mental health parity and an opportunity, and I'll be sure to let him know that you said hello.
Tell Noah I was surprised that Michigan snuck by last week.
Yeah.
Tell him Big Blue's going down big to the Gophers this year.
Absolutely. And I'm sure he'll be supportive of this mental health bill that we've got for him. But I used to be a lawyer, and I wasn't a very good lawyer because, you know, we're trained to never ask a question you don't know the answer to. But again, I was a bad lawyer, so I'm going to ask the question. And speaking, of course, just as a private citizen, have you, you know, what's, I think, tearing this state apart right now, and speaking to what Senator West mentioned earlier, was this business of the marriage amendment. And as I'm sure you know, just as a Minnesotan, several businesses, General Mills, Capella, St. Jude, business leaders like Tom Horner have taken a position against this. What, from our perspective, is just really divisive. Again, as a private citizen, have you decided how you're going to vote on this amendment?
I have not decided on the amendment. I don't have a position on the amendment right now. I'm retired. I'm going to keep my private views, my personal views, personal and private. I'm enjoying being a recovering alcoholic. I'm enjoying being a recovering politician, and I'm really enjoying being a recovering attorney. Thank you.
And Congressman Ramstad, you are welcome to come back to TwinWest anytime you want to. So again, thank you so much for being here today. would also like to thank all of our elected officials who are here today and those running as well. That's very important to have you here with us. And before we leave, I just want to remind everybody to register for TwinWest's annual celebration. That's on October 2nd at the Sheraton Minneapolis West. It's our chance to celebrate our wonderful members and usher in our new leadership on the Chamber's Board of Directors, and also say goodbye to those leaving the board. Our keynote speaker is Ken Paulus, President and CEO of Allina Health, so you will not want to miss this event. Also next month, and then I think I said that is at Sheraton Minneapolis West, yes. And then next month here for our next legislative breakfast, October 12th, we will have a very entertaining, I'm sure, pre-election legislative breakfast program with predictions that I'm sure we'll all enjoy. And also, again, I want to give a special thanks to Grand Casino Mille Lacs and Hinckley for, again, being our series sponsor this year, and also to Allina Health, Comcast, CenterPoint Energy, Walmart, and, of course, Swank Audiovisual. So everybody, have a fabulous Friday and an even better weekend. Thank you so much.